public transportation is of more limited value in rural areas.
Definitely, Vermont is I think presents a lot of unique challenges in terms of developing a sustainable transportation system because it is so rural, and that's a lot of what we focus on here. Yes, and I think public transportation in the way that we think of it as these fixed bus routes, big bus, that might not be the solution for Orleans County. But something that we're looking at right now is pedestrian traffic in rural areas, and I think they're finding that it's much higher than people traditionally think.
That people walk.
Mm-hmm. And most of it, I think, is people walking their dogs. But the fact is that they do walk on, and it's not, walking doesn't only happen in urban centers. And the idea of walkability is maybe a little more expansive than we often
So
think
there
of
is
it.
the potential, I mean, even you'd have to live less far from town than, say, I do, but people who live kind of in or near the center of the village, who now commonly get their car and drive a mile to go to the drugstore, that maybe if there were more sidewalks or something like that?
Yeah, I think the idea is that people are more likely to use alternate modes of transport if the infrastructure is available to them, if it feels safe, if there's less vehicle traffic or it's slower, or the sidewalk is wide enough or the shoulder is wide enough.
So you have a kind of a chicken and egg problem here, because when I know at home, when people say, because there, a lot of areas around where I live are not safe to walk, and say, there ought to be a sidewalk, and people say, well, people don't walk.
Yeah.
And you say, well, they'd walk if there were a sidewalk, which you can't really prove that either way.
No, although I always think of the bike path in Burlington. That it gets so much use, and I think you could have made a pretty strong case before it went in that you never see people biking down there. How many people are going to use it? And you think about how much money it brings into the city now.
But is that used just for recreation, or do people also bike to work?
I think it's primarily recreation because there's so few destinations that it takes you to.
Offices and shops and places.
Yeah.
What about are people toying with the idea of and looking into and doing serious studies? You said the great big bus is probably not realistic for a rural area.
Yeah.
We actually have mostly for senior citizens, but also there are some small,
Vans.
I don't know whether they're called minibuses. Like in Caledonia County, there's a not very frequent but daily bus service from St. J. To Linden and Linden State College and back. It kind of does a loop. Are people looking into the possibility of expanding that kind of service?
Yes, I think so. And vans, just smaller vehicles.
And of course, we're getting older in Vermont, and as we get even older, which to some extent we will, because so will the rest of the country, more and more people perhaps shouldn't drive.
Yeah.
And then, and they're still going to live in rural areas, many of them. So has that been put into the mix as far as you know of planning?
Oh, it's definitely an issue. We did some work with AARP here in Vermont.
Right.
Well, actually, I'm looking in Vermont, but also at a national scale. With that in mind, that the proportion of the population that may not be able to drive in the next 10 to 15 years is going to increase pretty rapidly. So mobility.
So what do you do?
Mobility will be an issue for that population.
In a way, though, won't that mean that we'll have to spend more in public money on transporting them, unless I don't know what.
Yeah.
Unless many of them can be persuaded to move into town, senior citizen apartments. But again, people don't want to live.
They want to stay where they are. So I think it would be a matter of providing services for them.
So do we have a little bit of a kind of an unresolvable problem here, or an unresolvable conflict, that the transportation planners are concerned about global warming and want to reduce the public subsidy to private transportation, would rather have rather like the anti-sprawl group, who'd rather have more development in cities, in the center of small villages, in towns, and fewer people building their house at the edge of the woods, whereas a lot of people like to build their house at the edge of the woods and like to build, or to buy an old farm and fix it up, even if that farm is several miles from where they have to go to shop or work if they're working. I mean, is this a cultural conflict or what?
I think it's it's true. It's a tension that exists, and it's. I mean, I think it would be great to live in some farmhouse 10 miles out of town too.
Right.
I have that dream, but I think maybe it's a matter of paying a truer cost for things, though. If you choose to live far from services, then you need to maybe accept some of the consequences that go along with that. And right now, we're through the way that we do subsidize automobile use, we make that affordable for a lot of people. And I don't know how much longer it can be affordable.